Travel to Alexandria in 250 BCE, a major centre of the ancient world, and home to one of history's greatest intellectual achievements, the Library of Alexandria. This institution stood as a hub of learning and research, unmatched in its size and ambition. Scholars from Egypt, Greece, Persia, India, and other parts of the world gathered here to study, debate, and contribute to the growing body of human knowledge. The library held hundreds of thousands of scrolls written in multiple languages covering science, medicine, history, mathematics, and literature from across civilizations. Euclid worked on the foundations of geometry. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with surprising accuracy, and Herophilos advanced the understanding of anatomy. Ships arriving at the port were required by law to hand over any written documents they carried. These were copied and stored, becoming part of the collection. But this age of progress was not built on solid ground. Despite its importance, the library was vulnerable to political instability, power struggles, and war. Over time, it faced multiple incidents of damage and neglect. Eventually, fires, whether accidental or deliberate, destroyed it. The loss was more than physical. Entire areas of science, philosophy, and literature vanished with it, much of which was never recovered. In this video, we'll explore the legacy of the Library of Alexandria and the mystery surrounding its destruction. The birth, Alexandria's foundation and vision. The story of the Library of Alexandria begins with one of history's most ambitious conquerors and his equally ambitious vision. When Alexander the Great founded the city of Alexandria in 331 BCE, he intended it to be more than just another strategic port on the Mediterranean coast. Alexandria was conceived as a bridge between East and West, a cosmopolitan centre where Greek culture could merge with the ancient wisdom of Egypt and the broader Near East. Alexander's vision, however, was cut short by his death in 323 BCE at the age of just 32. The massive empire he had built quickly fragmented among his generals, known as the Diadochi, or successors. Ptolemy the Phonsoter, one of Alexander's most trusted companions, claimed Egypt as his portion of the divided empire. It was Ptolemy who would transform Alexander's dream of Alexandria into reality, though the full realization of this vision would take generations to complete. Under Ptolemaic rule, Alexandria rapidly grew into one of the ancient world's most important cities. The Ptolemies, despite being Macedonian Greeks ruling over an Egyptian population, proved to be remarkably effective administrators and patrons of learning. They understood that knowledge was power, and that by making Alexandria the intellectual centre of the Mediterranean world, they could enhance both their own prestige and the strategic importance of their kingdom. The location of Alexandria proved perfect for this ambitious project. Situated on the Nile Delta, with easy access to both the Mediterranean Sea and the interior of Egypt, the city became a natural hub for trade routes connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia. This geographic advantage meant that merchants, diplomats, and travellers from across the known world regularly passed through Alexandria, bringing with them not only goods but also ideas, stories, and knowledge from their home cultures. The Ptolemies recognized this opportunity and systematically began to collect and preserve the intellectual treasures that flowed through their city. They established the Museum of Alexandria, from the Greek word museion, meaning shrine of the muses, which served as a kind of ancient university or research institute. The library was an integral part of this larger institution, designed to house and organize the vast collection of texts that the Ptolemies were determined to assemble. What set the Ptolemaic approach apart from other ancient libraries was both its scope and its systematic nature. While other rulers might collect books as luxury items or status symbols, the Ptolemies approached knowledge collection as a matter of state policy. They wanted nothing less than to gather all human knowledge in one place, creating what we might today call a comprehensive archive of world civilization. This vision was breathtaking in its ambition. In an age when information travelled slowly and books were rare and expensive, the idea of collecting texts from every known culture and language represented an almost unprecedented commitment to learning. The Ptolemies were essentially attempting to create the ancient world's first universal library, a place where scholars could access the collected wisdom of humanity without having to travel to dozens of different cities and cultures. The Golden Age, building the greatest library of the ancient world. The true Golden Age of the Library of Alexandria began under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who ruled from 283 to 246 BCE. It was during his reign that the library's collection grew most dramatically, and its reputation as the premier centre of learning in the ancient world became firmly established. Ptolemy II understood that building a great library required more than just accumulating scrolls. It required creating an environment where scholarship could flourish. The library quickly acquired many papyrus scrolls, owing largely to the Ptolemaic king's aggressive and well-funded policies for procuring texts. It is unknown precisely how many scrolls were housed at any given time, but estimates range from 40,000 to 400,000 at its height. These numbers, while uncertain, give us some sense of the library's remarkable scope. To put this in perspective, a private library of even 1,000 scrolls would have been considered extraordinarily large in the ancient world. The Ptolemies employed several innovative methods to build their collection. One of the most famous policies was the systematic confiscation and copying of books from ships entering Alexandria's harbour. Every vessel that docked was searched for texts, which were then confiscated, copied by skilled scribes, and the originals kept for the library while copies were returned to the original owners. This policy, while perhaps questionable by modern standards, demonstrates the lengths to which the Ptolemies were willing to go to build their collection. Another major acquisition method involved sending agents throughout the Mediterranean world to purchase or commission copies of important texts. The Ptolemies were willing to pay premium prices for rare or significant works, and they established a network of book dealers and scribes throughout the ancient world. They also engaged in what we might call scholarly diplomacy, offering generous stipends and working conditions to attract the most renowned scholars of their time to come to Alexandria and bring their personal libraries with them. The library's collection was remarkably diverse, reflecting the cosmopolitan nature of Alexandria itself. While Greek texts formed the core of the collection, the library also housed works in Egyptian hieroglyphics and Demotic script, as well as texts in Hebrew, Aramaic, Persian, and other languages. This linguistic diversity was crucial to the library's mission of preserving universal knowledge, but it also created significant challenges in terms of organization and accessibility. To manage this vast and diverse collection, the Ptolemies developed sophisticated systems of organization and cataloguing. The most famous of these was created by Callimachus of Cyrene, one of the greatest scholars of the Hellenistic period. Callimachus compiled what he called the Pinakes, or tables, which served as a comprehensive catalogue of the library's holdings. This catalogue was organized by subject matter and included biographical information about authors, summaries of their works, and critical assessments of their importance. The Pinakes represented one of the ancient world's most ambitious attempts at systematic bibliography and literary criticism. Callimachus divided knowledge into several broad categories, including rhetoric, law, epic poetry, tragedy, comedy, lyric poetry, history, medicine, mathematics, natural science, and miscellaneous works. Within each category, works were arranged alphabetically by author, with detailed information about each text's contents and significance. The physical organization of the library was equally impressive. The main library was housed within the royal quarter of Alexandria, probably as part of the larger museum complex. Over 100 scholars lived at the museum full-time to perform research, write, lecture, or translate and copy documents. The library was so large it had another branch or daughter library at the Temple of Serapis. This secondary location, known as the Serapeum, served both as an overflow facility for the main collection and as a more publicly accessible branch of the library. The reading rooms and study areas were designed to facilitate serious scholarship. Scholars had access to writing materials, research assistants, and comfortable spaces for extended study. The Ptolemies understood that simply accumulating books was not enough. They needed to create an environment where scholars could effectively use these resources to advance human knowledge. The great scholars, intellectual giants of Alexandria. The true measure of the Library of Alexandria's success lies not in the number of scrolls it housed, but in the extraordinary scholars it attracted and the groundbreaking work they accomplished. The Ptolemies' generous patronage and the library's unparalleled resources drew some of the ancient world's greatest minds to Alexandria, where they made discoveries and developed ideas that would influence human civilization for millennia. Perhaps no scholar better exemplifies the library's golden age than Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who served as the chief librarian from approximately 245 to 194 BCE. Eratosthenes was a true Renaissance man before the Renaissance, making significant contributions to mathematics, geography, astronomy, and poetry. His most famous achievement was calculating the circumference of the Earth with remarkable accuracy, using nothing more than geometry, careful observation, and logical reasoning. Eratosthenes noticed that, at noon, on the summer solstice, the sun shone directly down a deep well in the city of Syena, modern Aswan, meaning the sun was directly overhead. At the same time, in Alexandria, roughly 800 kilometers to the north, the sun cast a shadow indicating it was about 7.2 degrees from vertical. Using the geometric principle that this angle represented 7.2/360, or about 1/50th of a full circle, Eratosthenes calculated that the Earth's circumference was approximately 50 times the distance between Alexandria and Siena. His result of about 40,000 kilometers was remarkably close to the actual circumference of 40,075 kilometers. This achievement represents more than just clever mathematics. It demonstrates the kind of systematic, empirical approach to understanding the natural world that flourished at Alexandria. Eratosthenes had access to geographical texts from throughout the known world, astronomical observations from multiple cultures, and the mathematical tools developed by earlier scholars. The library provided the intellectual infrastructure that made such synthesis possible. Another towering figure associated with Alexandria was Euclid, whose Elements became one of history's most influential mathematical texts. While some uncertainty exists about whether Euclid actually worked at the library or simply in Alexandria during the early Ptolemaic period, his work clearly benefited from the city's intellectual environment. The Elements systematically organized and proved the fundamental principles of geometry, creating a logical framework that remained the standard for mathematical reasoning for over 2,000 years. Euclid's approach reflected the library's broader missions of organizing and systematizing knowledge. Rather than simply collecting geometric facts, he created a coherent system that demonstrated how complex truths could be derived from simple axioms through logical reasoning. This methodology influenced not only mathematics, but also philosophy, science, and other fields of inquiry. The library also fostered advances in astronomy that wouldn't be equaled for centuries. Aristarchus of Samos, working in Alexandria during the 3rd century BCE, proposed that the Earth orbited the Sun, anticipating Copernicus by nearly 18 centuries. While his heliocentric theory wasn't widely accepted in antiquity, it demonstrates the kind of revolutionary thinking that the library's environment encouraged. Hipparchus, another astronomer associated with Alexandria, made precise observations of stellar positions and discovered the precession of the equinoxes. His star catalogue and mathematical methods for predicting celestial events laid the groundwork for later astronomical advances. The library's collection of observational records from multiple cultures gave astronomers like Hipparchus access to data spanning centuries, enabling them to detect long-term patterns invisible to individual observers. In the field of medicine, Alexandria became the ancient world's leading center for anatomical research. Herophilus and Erasistratus, working in the 3rd century BCE, conducted systematic dissections of human corpses, something that was forbidden in most other ancient cultures. Their discoveries about the circulatory system, nervous system, and organ functions advanced medical knowledge tremendously. The library's medical texts from Egypt, Greece, and other cultures provided these physicians with a comprehensive foundation of existing knowledge to build upon. The literary and linguistic work conducted at Alexandria was equally impressive. Scholars like Apollonius of Rhodes wrote epic poetry that rivaled Homer, while critics and grammarians like Aristophanes of Byzantium developed sophisticated methods for textual analysis and editing. These scholars weren't just preserving ancient texts, they were establishing principles of literary criticism and textual scholarship that remain influential today. One of the library's most ambitious projects was the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, known as the Septuagint. This project, which probably took place over several decades during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, made Jewish religious and philosophical texts accessible to the broader Greek-speaking world. The translation work required not only linguistic expertise, but also deep cultural understanding, as translators had to convey concepts and ideas that didn't always have direct equivalents in Greek culture. The scholars at Alexandria also made significant advances in engineering and technology. Ctesibius invented the water clock and developed principles of hydraulics and pneumatics. His student, Hero of Alexandria, created numerous mechanical devices including the first known steam engine, various automated machines, and precise measuring instruments. While these inventions remained curiosities rather than practical applications, they demonstrate the spirit of innovation and experimentation that characterized Alexandrian scholarship. What made these achievements possible was not just individual genius, but the collaborative environment that the library fostered. Scholars had access to texts and ideas from multiple cultures, generous funding for their research, and opportunities to interact with colleagues working in different fields. This interdisciplinary approach enabled insights and discoveries that would have been impossible in more isolated scholarly communities. Daily life and operations, how the library actually worked. Understanding the Library of Alexandria requires looking beyond its famous scholars and remarkable collection to examine how this institution actually functioned on a day-to-day basis. The library was not merely a repository of scrolls, but a living, breathing centre of intellectual activity, with complex systems for acquisition, organization, preservation, and access. The physical layout of the library reflected its multiple functions. The main building, located within Alexandria's royal quarter, was designed to house both the collection and the scholars who worked with it. Reading rooms were equipped with comfortable seating and good natural lighting, essential for the prolonged study of papyrus scrolls. Separate areas were designated for copying and translation work, with teams of skilled scribes working under the supervision of scholarly editors. The daily routine at the library began early, taking advantage of the best natural light for reading and writing. Scholars would typically spend their mornings engaged in primary research, studying texts relevant to their particular areas of expertise. The afternoon hours were often devoted to writing, discussion, and teaching. Evenings might involve lectures, debates, or social gatherings where ideas could be exchanged informally. The acquisition process was remarkably sophisticated for its time. Beyond the famous policy of confiscating books from ships, the library employed a network of agents throughout the Mediterranean world to identify and acquire important texts. These agents needed to be not only knowledgeable about literature and scholarship, but also skilled negotiators and judges of authenticity. They worked with local scribes, scholars, and book dealers to commission copies of significant works, or to acquire original manuscripts. Quality control was a major concern in this acquisition process. The library's reputation depended on the accuracy and authenticity of its texts, so careful procedures were developed to verify the reliability of new acquisitions. Scholars would compare multiple copies of the same work when available, checking for errors, omissions, or unauthorized additions. This textual criticism was one of the library's most important scholarly activities, establishing standards for textual accuracy that influenced manuscript traditions for centuries. The copying and translation work at the library was equally systematic. Teams of scribes, working under scholarly supervision, produced multiple copies of important texts to ensure their preservation and to make them available to more scholars. The process was labor-intensive and expensive, requiring high-quality papyrus, skilled penmanship, and careful proofreading. The library maintained strict standards for these copies, understanding that errors introduced during copying could corrupt texts for future generations. Translation work presented even greater challenges. The library housed texts in numerous languages, and making this diverse collection accessible to scholars required a substantial translation program. Translators needed not only linguistic skills, but also deep cultural knowledge to convey accurately the meaning and nuance of texts from different traditions. The translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, for example, required teams of scholars working over many years to produce a version that was both linguistically accurate and culturally sensitive. The cataloguing system developed by Callimachus and his successors was essential to making the library's vast collection usable. The Pinakes provided scholars with detailed information about the library's holdings, including author biographies, work summaries, and critical assessments. This catalogue was continuously updated as new acquisitions were processed and as scholars developed new insights about existing texts. Access to the library's collection was carefully regulated. While the exact policies are not entirely clear from surviving sources, it appears that serious scholars could gain access to most texts, while more casual readers might be limited to certain sections or copies. The library's staff included specialists who could help scholars locate relevant materials and navigate the complex organization system. The preservation of papyrus scrolls in Alexandria's Mediterranean climate presented ongoing challenges. Papyrus is vulnerable to humidity, insects, and physical deterioration, so the library developed systematic approaches to conservation. Scrolls were stored in protective cases, and reading rooms were designed to minimize exposure to damaging environmental factors. Regular copying of deteriorating texts was essential to preserve their contents for future generations. The library also served important educational functions. While it was primarily a research institution, it also provided training for the next generation of scholars. Young men from wealthy families throughout the Greek world came to Alexandria to study with renowned scholars, and the library provided the resources they needed for advanced education. This educational role helped spread Alexandrian scholarly methods and standards throughout the ancient world. Funding for all these activities came primarily from the Ptolemaic court, which understood that the library enhanced the prestige and strategic importance of their kingdom. The costs were substantial, including not only the salaries of scholars and staff, but also the expenses of acquiring texts, maintaining facilities, and supporting the various research and educational activities. The Ptolemies' willingness to sustain this investment for several centuries was crucial to the library's success. The international character of the library created interesting diplomatic and cultural dynamics. Scholars from different cultures brought their own traditions and perspectives, sometimes leading to conflicts or misunderstandings. The library's administration had to navigate these cultural differences while maintaining an environment conducive to serious scholarship. This multicultural aspect was both one of the library's greatest strengths and one of its ongoing challenges. The decline, multiple causes of a gradual fall. The decline of the Library of Alexandria was not the result of a single catastrophic event, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over several centuries. While fires and destruction certainly played a role in the library's history, modern scholars increasingly point to a less dramatic, but perhaps more tragic explanation: gradual decline through neglect and the natural degradation of materials. Understanding this decline requires examining the complex interplay of political, economic, social, and cultural factors that gradually undermine the institution's vitality. The library's golden age began to fade as early as the 2nd century BCE, when the Ptolemaic dynasty started experiencing serious political and economic difficulties. The kingdom faced increasing pressure from Rome's expanding influence in the Mediterranean, while internal power struggles weakened the royal court's ability to maintain consistent support for scholarly activities. The later Ptolemies were generally less interested in intellectual pursuits than their predecessors, and they faced mounting financial pressures that made the library's expensive operations increasingly difficult to sustain. Political instability had direct consequences for the library's operations. Scholars require stable conditions and long-term support to conduct serious research. But the later Ptolemaic period was marked by frequent dynastic conflicts, palace coups, and civil wars. These disruptions made it difficult to maintain the consistent funding and administrative support that the library required. Many prominent scholars began seeking opportunities elsewhere, leading to a brain drain that further weakened the institution. The Roman conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE marked a significant turning point in the library's history. While the Romans were not necessarily hostile to learning, they had different priorities and approaches to intellectual activity. Roman culture valued practical applications of knowledge more than pure research, and Roman patrons were generally more interested in supporting projects that had obvious political or military benefits. Under Roman rule, Alexandria remained an important city, but it was no longer the center of an independent kingdom whose rulers saw the library as a symbol of their power and prestige. The library became just one institution among many in the vast Roman Empire, competing for resources and attention with other projects that Roman administrators might consider more immediately useful. Economic factors also played a crucial role in the library's decline. Maintaining the institution was extraordinarily expensive, requiring not only substantial ongoing operational costs, but also continuous investment in new acquisitions and facility maintenance. As the economic importance of Alexandria declined relative to other centers in the Roman Empire, it became increasingly difficult to justify these expenses. The rise of other intellectual centers throughout the Roman world also reduced Alexandria's unique appeal. Cities like Athens, Rhodes, and later Constantinople developed their own libraries and scholarly communities, creating alternatives for students and researchers who might previously have been drawn exclusively to Alexandria. This competition diluted the concentration of scholarly talent that had been one of Alexandria's greatest advantages. Religious and cultural changes further contributed to the library's decline. The rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire brought new attitudes toward pagan learning and classical texts. While many Christian scholars valued ancient learning, others viewed pagan philosophical and scientific works with suspicion or hostility. The library's collection, which had been built primarily during the pre-Christian era, contained many texts that some Christians considered problematic or dangerous. The Temple of Serapis, or Serapeum, yet this too was destroyed in 391 CE, when the Christian rulers of Alexandria clamped down on pagan cults in the city and sacked the temple. The destruction of the Serapeum, which housed part of the library's collection, represented a significant loss of materials and facilities. However, this event was more a symptom of the library's broader decline than its primary cause. The practical challenges of preserving ancient texts also accumulated over time. Papyrus scrolls have limited lifespans, particularly in Mediterranean climates, and maintaining a collection required constant copying and recopying of deteriorating materials. As the library's resources and staff declined, it became increasingly difficult to keep up with these preservation needs. Many texts were simply allowed to deteriorate beyond recovery. Changes in reading and writing technology also affected the library's relevance. The gradual transition from papyrus scrolls to parchment codices, the book format we recognize today, made many of the library's organizational systems obsolete. The new format was more durable and easier to use, but it required different storage and cataloging approaches than the scroll-based system that the library had perfected. The rise of new philosophical and religious movements also changed the intellectual landscape in ways that reduced demand for the type of comprehensive secular learning that the library represented. Christian monasteries began developing their own libraries focused on religious texts, while Islamic scholars would later create centers of learning that emphasized different types of knowledge and used different organizational principles. By the time of the Arab conquest of Alexandria, in 641 CE, the library had already ceased to function as a major center of learning. In light of the above analysis, most contemporary scholars agree that the ancient Library of Alexandria had ceased to exist long before the Arab conquest of Egypt. The institution that the Arabs encountered was a shadow of its former self, weakened by centuries of neglect, resource constraints, and changing cultural priorities. The decline speaks to broader questions about the sustainability of intellectual institutions. The library's success had depended on a unique combination of factors: generous royal patronage, political stability, economic prosperity, cultural diversity, and a strong commitment to learning for its own sake. As these conditions changed, the library could not adapt quickly enough to maintain its position as the ancient world's premier centre of scholarship. Myths and legends. Separating fact from fiction. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria has become one of history's most enduring and emotionally powerful stories, but much of what people believe about this event is based more on legend than historical fact. The popular narrative of a single catastrophic fire that destroyed centuries of accumulated wisdom in one terrible moment has captured imaginations for generations, but modern historical scholarship reveals a much more complex and less dramatic reality. If there is a story that forms the heart of new atheist bad history, it's the tale of the great Library of Alexandria and its destruction by a Christian mob. It's the central moral fable of the Draper White thesis, where wise and rational Greeks and Romans store up all the wisdom of the pre-Christian ancient world in a single library, treasuring science and reason and bringing Western civilization to the brink of a technological and industrial revolution. This narrative, while compelling, oversimplifies both the library's actual history and the complex factors that led to its decline. One of the most persistent myths attributes the library's destruction to Julius Caesar during his siege of Alexandria in 48 BCE. According to this version of events, Caesar's forces accidentally set fire to the harbour area and the flames spread to destroy the entire library. However, historical evidence suggests a very different story. Scholars have interpreted Cassius Dio's wording to indicate that the fire did not actually destroy the entire library itself, but rather one or more library warehouses near the docks. Whatever damage Caesar's fire may have caused, evidently the library was not completely destroyed. The Caesar fire story appears to have grown in the telling over centuries. Ancient sources like Plutarch and Cassius Dio do mention fires during Caesar's Alexandrian campaign, but they describe damage to warehouses containing books intended for export, not to the main library building itself. The confusion probably arose because these warehouse fires did result in the loss of many scrolls, but they represented only a small fraction of the library's total holdings. Another popular myth blames the library's destruction on Christian mobs acting under the influence of religious fanaticism. This story often focuses on the historical figure of Hypatia, a female mathematician and philosopher who was murdered by a Christian mob in 415 CE. While Hypatia's death was indeed a tragic example of religious violence, there is no historical evidence that it was connected to any systematic destruction of the library or its collection. The Christian destruction narrative gained popularity during the Enlightenment, when writers like Edward Gibbon used it to criticize religious authority and promote secular values. However, this interpretation oversimplifies the complex relationship between Christianity and classical learning. Many early Christian scholars valued ancient texts and worked to preserve them, even when they disagreed with their content. The destruction of the Serapeum in 391 CE, while real, represented the targeting of a pagan religious site rather than a systematic attack on learning itself. A third major myth attributes the library's final destruction to the Arab conquest of Alexandria in 641 CE. According to this story, the Caliph Omar ordered the library's scrolls to be burned, declaring that any books contradicting the Quran were heretical, while any books agreeing with it were redundant. This tale has been thoroughly debunked by modern historians, who point out that it first appeared in accounts written centuries after the supposed event by authors with clear anti-Islamic biases. The Omar burning story is particularly problematic because it contradicts everything we know about early Islamic attitudes toward learning. The Arab conquerors generally showed great respect for scholarship and frequently preserved and translated ancient texts. Many classical works survived precisely because Islamic scholars valued them and took the trouble to translate them into Arabic. The idea that Omar would have ordered the destruction of ancient learning contradicts both his historical character and the broader pattern of Islamic respect for knowledge. Exactly why the ancient library burned is unclear. Today we must remember that war is not the only way Alexandria can be destroyed. This observation captures an important truth about the library's actual fate. Rather than being destroyed in any single dramatic event, the library gradually declined due to a combination of factors including political instability, economic difficulties, changing cultural priorities, and simple neglect. The persistence of these destruction myths reveals something important about how societies remember and interpret the past. The story of the library's destruction serves as a powerful metaphor for the fragility of civilization and the dangers of fanaticism, ignorance, and violence. These themes resonate strongly with modern audiences, particularly in times when intellectual freedom and educational institutions seem threatened. However, the mythical version of the library's destruction also creates problematic historical distortions. It presents a simplistic narrative that pits reason against superstition, civilization against barbarism, in ways that obscure the more complex realities of historical change. The real story of the library's decline is less dramatic but more instructive for understanding how intellectual institutions actually function and what they need to survive. The mythical narrative also tends to exaggerate both the library's historical importance and the consequences of its decline. While the library was indeed a remarkable institution that made significant contributions to human knowledge, it was not the sole repository of ancient learning, nor was its decline the primary cause of any supposed dark age. Knowledge was preserved and transmitted through many different channels throughout the ancient and medieval periods. Understanding the difference between myth and reality regarding the library's fate is crucial for several reasons. First, it helps us develop a more accurate understanding of historical processes and avoid oversimplified explanations for complex events. Second, it reveals how historical narratives can be shaped by the political and cultural concerns of later periods, rather than the actual evidence from the past. Finally, it provides more useful lessons for contemporary debates about intellectual freedom, education, and cultural preservation. The real story of the Library of Alexandria is in many ways more interesting and instructive than the myths that have grown up around it. Rather than being destroyed by a single act of vandalism, the library declined gradually as the conditions that had made it possible changed over time. This process offers insights into what intellectual institutions need to thrive and what threatens their continued existence. Archaeological evidence. The quest to understand the historical reality of the Library of Alexandria faces a significant challenge. Remarkably little physical evidence remains of this legendary institution. Archaeologists have conducted numerous excavations in Alexandria, but so far, no definitive remains of the library have been found. This absence of clear archaeological evidence has led to ongoing debates among scholars about everything from the library's exact location to the details of its organization and operations. The scarcity of physical remains is not entirely surprising when we consider Alexandria's complex history. The ancient city has been continuously inhabited for over 2 millennia, with successive generations building over earlier structures. Much of ancient Alexandria now lies beneath the modern city, making systematic archaeological investigation extremely difficult. Additionally, Alexandria's location on the Mediterranean coast means that some ancient structures have been lost to coastal erosion and changes in sea level. Despite these challenges, archaeologists have made important discoveries that shed light on ancient Alexandria and its intellectual life. The recent discoveries have revealed the underwater existence of an immense archaeological site near Pharos, where remains of port installations of the Greek city have been identified, as well as royal quarters of the Ptolemies used to be. These underwater excavations, led by marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio and others, have revealed extensive remains of the ancient royal quarter, including palaces, temples, and other buildings that would have been contemporary with the library. The statue of an Isis priest holding an Osiris jar. It was found on the sunken island of Antirodos in the ancient harbour of Alexandria. The statue is made from black granite. Discoveries like this provide crucial insights into the cultural and religious context in which the library operated. The presence of high-quality sculptures and architectural elements demonstrates the wealth and sophistication of Ptolemaic Alexandria, supporting historical accounts of the generous royal patronage that made the library possible. The underwater archaeology has also revealed the remains of the famous Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which stood near the royal quarter where the library was likely located. While the lighthouse itself was not directly connected to the library, its ruins help archaeologists understand the layout and scale of ancient Alexandria's most important district. On land, archaeological work has been more challenging but has still yielded important results. Excavations have revealed parts of the ancient city's street grid, foundations of public buildings and residential areas that help us understand the urban context in which the library functioned. These discoveries confirm that Ptolemaic Alexandria was indeed a major urban centre with the infrastructure necessary to support a large scholarly community. One of the most significant archaeological sites related to the library is the Serapeum, the temple complex that housed part of the library's collection in later periods. Excavations at this site have revealed the foundations of a large temple complex with associated buildings that could have served as reading rooms, storage areas, and living quarters for scholars. While these remains date primarily to the Roman period rather than the library's golden age, they provide valuable insights into how such institutions were organized and operated. The absence of clear archaeological evidence for the main library building has led some scholars to question whether the institution was ever as large or important as historical sources suggest. However, this skepticism may be premature. The royal quarter of ancient Alexandria, where the library was most likely located, remains largely unexcavated due to the presence of modern buildings and infrastructure. Future archaeological work in this area could potentially reveal significant remains. Recent technological advances have opened new possibilities for understanding ancient Alexandria. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other remote sensing techniques allow archaeologists to detect buried structures without extensive excavation. These methods have already identified several promising sites for future investigation, including areas that may contain remains of major Ptolemaic buildings. Now, a team of scientists is using high-resolution X-ray technology to try to decipher what could be the oldest papyri on the planet. Even when archaeological evidence is scarce, new technologies are providing fresh insights into ancient texts and documents. Advanced imaging techniques can reveal text on damaged or deteriorated papyri that would otherwise be unreadable, potentially recovering lost works from the library's collection. The discovery and analysis of ancient papyri from other sites in Egypt have also provided important context for understanding how institutions like the library operated. Papyri from Oxyrhynchus and other sites have revealed details about ancient library practices, book collecting, scholarly correspondence, and educational methods that help fill in gaps in our knowledge about Alexandria. Archaeological work in other ancient cities with major libraries has provided comparative evidence that helps us understand what the Library of Alexandria might have looked like. Excavations at Pergamon, for example, have revealed the remains of a major Hellenistic library with reading rooms, storage areas, and associated buildings. While each ancient library was unique, these comparative sites help archaeologists and historians develop more accurate reconstructions of how the Library of Alexandria might have been organized and operated. The study of ancient papyri has also revealed important information about the intellectual culture of Ptolemaic and Roman Alexandria. Documents found throughout Egypt include scholarly correspondence, book lists, educational texts, and administrative records that provide insights into how knowledge was created, preserved, and transmitted in the ancient world. While these papyri don't directly describe the Library of Alexandria, they illuminate the broader scholarly environment in which it operated. Recent discoveries have also shed light on the fate of the library's collection. Papyrus fragments found at various sites sometimes contain texts that were known to have been housed at Alexandria, suggesting that parts of the collection may have survived the institution's decline and been dispersed to other locations. This pattern of dispersal, rather than total destruction, fits better with the historical evidence than the dramatic destruction narratives that have captured popular imagination. The ongoing archaeological work in Alexandria continues to reveal new aspects of the ancient city. Recent excavations have uncovered additional sections of the ancient street grid, parts of the harbour installations, and remains of public buildings that help us understand the urban environment in which the library flourished. Each new discovery adds to our understanding of this remarkable ancient centre of learning. While the absence of definitive archaeological remains of the library itself is frustrating, the cumulative evidence from underwater and terrestrial archaeology, papyrus studies, and comparative sites provides an increasingly detailed picture of ancient Alexandria and its intellectual life. This evidence supports the general reliability of historical accounts about the library, while also revealing the complexity and sophistication of the scholarly culture that surrounded it. The library's lasting impact on human civilization. The influence of the Library of Alexandria extends far beyond its physical existence in the ancient world. Even after the institution itself had declined and disappeared, the ideas, methods, and vision it represented continued to shape human approaches to knowledge, learning, and intellectual inquiry. Understanding this lasting impact reveals why the library remains relevant to contemporary discussions about education, research, and cultural preservation. Perhaps the most fundamental contribution of the Library of Alexandria was its demonstration that systematic collection and organization of knowledge could accelerate human understanding. Before Alexandria, most learning was transmitted through personal relationships between teachers and students, or preserved in the archives of specific institutions like temples or royal courts. The library pioneered the concept of a universal repository of human knowledge, accessible to qualified scholars regardless of their particular cultural or institutional affiliations. This vision of universal access to knowledge profoundly influenced later intellectual developments. The great medieval libraries of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Paris all drew inspiration from the Alexandrian model, attempting to collect and preserve texts from multiple cultures and languages. The Renaissance humanists who rediscovered classical learning were consciously trying to recreate something like the comprehensive scholarly environment that had existed in ancient Alexandria. The organizational methods developed at Alexandria also had lasting influence. The cataloging system created by Callimachus established principles for bibliographic organization that remained influential throughout the ancient and medieval periods. The idea of organizing knowledge by subject matter, providing biographical information about authors, and including critical assessments of different works, became standard practice in later libraries and educational institutions. The library's approach to textual criticism and scholarly editing established methodological standards that continue to influence academic work today. Alexandrian scholars developed systematic methods for comparing different versions of texts, identifying errors and interpolations, and producing authoritative editions. These techniques were crucial for preserving the accuracy of ancient texts as they were copied and transmitted over centuries. The translation work conducted at Alexandria also had profound long-term consequences. The Septuagint translation of the Hebrew Bible made Jewish religious and philosophical ideas accessible to the broader Hellenistic world, facilitating cultural exchange and influencing the development of early Christianity. The translation methods developed by Alexandrian scholars established principles for rendering texts from one language and cultural context into another while preserving their essential meaning and significance. The interdisciplinary approach fostered at Alexandria became a model for later centers of learning. The library's scholars worked across multiple fields, combining mathematical, astronomical, geographical and literary studies in ways that generated new insights and discoveries. This holistic approach to knowledge influenced the development of medieval universities and continues to inform contemporary discussions about the importance of interdisciplinary research. The library's influence on scientific methodology was particularly significant. Alexandrian scholars like Eratosthenes and Hipparchus developed systematic approaches to observation, measurement, and hypothesis testing that anticipated key elements of modern scientific method. Their work demonstrated how theoretical understanding could be combined with empirical observation to generate reliable knowledge about the natural world. The educational innovations developed at Alexandria also had lasting impact. The combination of advanced research with teaching and training created a model that influenced the development of universities and other institutions of higher learning. The idea that scholars should both contribute to knowledge through original research and transmit that knowledge to future generations became a fundamental principle of academic life. The library's commitment to preserving knowledge from multiple cultures established important precedents for cultural preservation and exchange. The Ptolemies' efforts to collect texts in various languages and from different traditions demonstrated the value of cultural diversity for advancing human understanding. This multicultural approach influenced later institutions and continues to inform contemporary debates about the importance of preserving and accessing diverse forms of knowledge. The technological innovations associated with Alexandria also had significant consequences. Advances in mechanical engineering, hydraulics and other fields contributed to the gradual accumulation of technical knowledge that would eventually contribute to major technological developments. While many Alexandrian inventions remained curiosities in their own time, they preserved important principles and techniques that were rediscovered and developed further in later periods. The literary and linguistic work conducted at Alexandria established important precedents for textual scholarship and criticism. The development of systematic approaches to editing, commenting on and interpreting texts influenced the transmission of classical literature and continues to inform contemporary literary studies. The principles of textual analysis developed by Alexandrian scholars remain fundamental to fields like philology, literary criticism, and historical research. The library's influence on Islamic scholarship was particularly important for the preservation and transmission of classical knowledge. Islamic scholars who encountered texts preserved in Alexandria and other centers of Hellenistic learning translated and commented on them extensively, ensuring their survival through the medieval period. The Alexandrian model of comprehensive knowledge collection influenced the development of major Islamic libraries in Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba. The rediscovery of classical texts during the Renaissance was deeply influenced by the Alexandrian legacy. Humanist scholars consciously sought to recreate the comprehensive approach to learning that had characterized ancient Alexandria, collecting manuscripts, establishing libraries, and fostering scholarly communities dedicated to the recovery and understanding of ancient wisdom. The library's vision of knowledge as a public good, worthy of significant investment and institutional support, continues to influence contemporary debates about funding for education and research. The Ptolemaic commitment to supporting scholarship for its own sake, rather than merely for immediate practical applications, established important precedents for the public support of intellectual inquiry. Modern libraries, universities, and research institutions continue to grapple with many of the same challenges that faced the Library of Alexandria. How to collect and organize vast amounts of information, how to make knowledge accessible to those who need it, how to preserve important materials for future generations, and how to foster environments conducive to learning and discovery. The Alexandrian experience, both its successes and its ultimate decline, provides valuable insights for addressing these ongoing challenges. Modern parallels. The story of the Library of Alexandria resonates powerfully in our contemporary digital age, offering both inspiration and cautionary lessons for how we approach the creation, preservation, and dissemination of knowledge. The parallels between ancient Alexandria's ambitious vision and modern attempts to create universal digital repositories are striking and instructive. The most obvious modern parallel to the Library of Alexandria is the Internet itself, which has created unprecedented opportunities for collecting, organizing, and accessing human knowledge. Like the ancient library, the Internet represents an attempt to gather information from around the world and make it available to anyone with the means to access it. The scale is vastly different, but the underlying vision of universal access to knowledge remains remarkably similar. Projects like Google Books, which aims to digitize millions of volumes from libraries around the world, directly echo the Alexandrian mission of comprehensive knowledge collection. Google's ambitious goal of making the world's information universally accessible and useful sounds remarkably like something Ptolemy II might have endorsed. The technical challenges of digitizing texts in multiple languages and formats parallel the difficulties that Alexandrian scholars faced in organizing and cataloging their diverse collection of scrolls. Wikipedia represents another fascinating parallel to the Alexandrian project. Like the ancient library, Wikipedia aims to collect and organize human knowledge in a systematic, accessible format. The collaborative nature of Wikipedia creation, involving contributors from around the world, mirrors the international character of Alexandrian scholarship. However, Wikipedia also faces challenges that the ancient library never had to address, particularly questions about the reliability and authority of information created through crowdsourcing rather than expert scholarship. The digital preservation challenges we face today echo the preservation problems that plagued the ancient library. Just as papyrus scrolls were vulnerable to physical deterioration, digital files face risks from technological obsolescence, data corruption, and format changes. The rapid pace of technological change means that digital preservation requires constant attention and resources, much like the continuous copying that was necessary to maintain the ancient collection. Modern universities and research institutions face many of the same structural challenges that ultimately contributed to the library's decline. Questions about funding priorities, the balance between pure research and practical applications, and the challenge of maintaining institutional support across changing political administrations are as relevant today as they were in Ptolemaic Egypt. The experience of the Library of Alexandria reminds us that even the most impressive intellectual institutions require sustained commitment and resources to survive. The Internet Archive, founded by Brewster Carley, represents perhaps the closest modern equivalent to the Library of Alexandria in terms of mission and vision. The archive's goal of providing universal access to all knowledge directly echoes the Alexandrian mission, and its efforts to preserve websites, books, movies, and other cultural materials face many of the same challenges that confronted ancient librarians. The Internet Archive's struggles with copyright issues, funding limitations, and technical challenges illustrate how difficult it remains to realize the Alexandrian vision even with modern technology. The rise of academic databases and digital libraries has transformed scholarly research in ways that Alexandrian scholars would recognize and appreciate. Resources like JSTOR, Project Muse, and the Arxiv preprint server have created new possibilities for accessing and cross-referencing scholarly materials from multiple disciplines and institutions. These platforms enable the kind of comprehensive interdisciplinary research that characterized the best work done at Alexandria. However, the digital age has also created new forms of the access and equity issues that existed in the ancient world. While the Internet has made vast amounts of information available to anyone with a connection, significant digital divides persist based on geography, economics, and education. The vision of truly universal access to knowledge remains as challenging to achieve today as it was in ancient Alexandria. The phenomenon of information overload in the digital age mirrors some of the organizational challenges faced by the ancient library. Just as Alexandrian scholars needed to develop systems for cataloging and organizing their vast collection, modern users struggle to navigate the overwhelming amount of information available online. The development of sophisticated search algorithms and recommendation systems represents a contemporary approach to problems that Callimachus faced when creating his Pinakes catalogue. Social media platforms and online communities have created new forms of the scholarly discussion and debate that characterized life at the ancient library. While these platforms lack the institutional structure and quality control of traditional academic venues, they do enable rapid exchange of ideas across geographical and institutional boundaries in ways that would have impressed Alexandrian scholars. The challenges of misinformation and fake news in the digital age echo ancient concerns about textual accuracy and authenticity. Just as Alexandrian scholars developed methods for evaluating the reliability of different manuscript traditions, contemporary information consumers need skills for assessing the credibility of online sources. The problem of distinguishing reliable information from unreliable sources is as challenging today as it was when ancient scholars tried to determine which version of a text was most accurate. Modern debates about intellectual property and open access to scholarly research parallel ancient discussions about the balance between preserving knowledge and making it available. The Ptolemies' policy of confiscating books from ships entering Alexandria's harbour raises questions about the ethics of knowledge acquisition that remain relevant in contemporary discussions about fair use, copyright, and academic freedom. The globalization of scholarship through digital technologies has created opportunities for international collaboration that surpass even what was possible in cosmopolitan Alexandria. Modern research projects routinely involve scholars from multiple continents working together in ways that would have been impossible before digital communication. At the same time, language barriers and cultural differences continue to create challenges for truly global knowledge sharing. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a particularly striking parallel to the library's experience. Just as political instability and resource constraints threatened the ancient institution, the pandemic forced modern libraries, universities, and research institutions to rapidly adapt their operations while facing significant budget pressures. The shift to digital learning and remote research highlighted both the possibilities and limitations of technology-mediated knowledge transmission. Looking forward, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning offer new possibilities for organizing and accessing information that go beyond what was imaginable in ancient Alexandria. AI-powered systems could potentially create more sophisticated cataloging and recommendation systems than Callimachus could have dreamed of. However, these technologies also raise new questions about authority, bias, and the human role in knowledge creation and curation. The story of the Library of Alexandria reminds us that the preservation and transmission of human knowledge is neither automatic nor inevitable. It requires sustained institutional commitment, adequate resources, and ongoing adaptation to changing circumstances. While our technological capabilities far exceed what was available to ancient scholars, the fundamental challenges of collecting, organizing, preserving, and sharing knowledge across cultures and generations remain remarkably similar. Lessons for the future. What Alexandria teaches us today. The rise and fall of the Library of Alexandria offers profound lessons for contemporary society as we navigate our own information age and grapple with questions about how to preserve, organize, and transmit human knowledge. While the specific technologies and political contexts have changed dramatically since ancient times, the fundamental challenges that the library faced remain remarkably relevant to current debates about education, research, and cultural preservation. One of the most important lessons from Alexandria concerns the crucial role of sustained institutional support for intellectual inquiry. The library flourished under the generous and consistent patronage of the early Ptolemies, who understood that supporting scholarship and learning enhanced their kingdom's prestige and strategic importance. However, as political priorities changed and economic pressures mounted, this support eroded, contributing significantly to the library's decline. This pattern offers important insights for contemporary debates about funding for education and research. The Alexandrian experience suggests that intellectual institutions require not just initial investment, but sustained long-term commitment across changing political administrations and economic conditions. The tendency to view education and research funding as discretionary spending that can be cut during difficult times ignores the reality that knowledge institutions, like the physical infrastructure of society, require consistent maintenance and investment to remain viable. The library's decline also illustrates the dangers of political instability and short-term thinking for intellectual institutions. The later Ptolemies' focus on immediate political survival, rather than long-term cultural development, gradually weakened the conditions that had made Alexandria a magnet for scholars from throughout the ancient world. Contemporary institutions face similar pressures from political leaders who may prioritize immediate, visible results over the patient, long-term work of knowledge creation and preservation. Another crucial lesson involves the importance of cultural diversity and international cooperation for advancing human understanding. The library's greatest achievements came from bringing together scholars, texts, and ideas from multiple cultures and intellectual traditions. This cosmopolitan environment enabled synthetic insights and discoveries that would have been impossible in more culturally homogeneous settings. This lesson remains highly relevant in an era of increasing nationalism and cultural polarization. The Alexandrian experience suggests that attempts to limit international scholarly exchange or to privilege particular cultural traditions over others ultimately impoverish the intellectual environment for everyone. The most innovative and important advances in knowledge continue to come from cross-cultural collaboration and the synthesis of diverse perspectives. The library's approach to knowledge preservation offers both positive and cautionary lessons for the digital age. The Alexandrian scholars' systematic approach to copying and recopying texts to prevent their loss provides a model for contemporary digital preservation efforts. However, the ultimate failure to maintain this preservation work as resources declined illustrates the ongoing nature of conservation challenges. Digital preservation faces many of the same fundamental issues that confronted the ancient library: the need for continuous investment, the vulnerability of storage media, and the importance of maintaining institutional memory about preservation practices. The fact that digital files can become inaccessible due to technological obsolescence parallels the way that ancient texts could be lost through physical deterioration or the loss of relevant linguistic or cultural knowledge. The library's experience with organizing and cataloging vast amounts of information provides insights for managing information overload in the digital age. Callimachus's Pinakes represented a sophisticated attempt to make a large, diverse collection accessible through systematic organization and critical evaluation. Contemporary challenges in information organization, from library science to search engine algorithms, continue to grapple with similar problems of classification, authority, and accessibility. The interdisciplinary character of Alexandrian scholarship offers important lessons for contemporary education and research. The library's most significant achievements came from scholars who worked across traditional disciplinary boundaries, combining insights from mathematics, astronomy, geography, literature, and other fields. This approach enabled discoveries and innovations that would have been impossible within narrower specializations. Modern universities and research institutions often struggle with disciplinary silos that can inhibit the kind of synthetic thinking that characterized the best Alexandrian scholarship. The contemporary emphasis on specialized expertise, while important for advancing knowledge within particular fields, can sometimes come at the expense of the broader, integrative approaches that enable breakthrough insights. The library's commitment to accuracy and textual criticism provides a model for addressing contemporary challenges with misinformation and unreliable sources. Alexandrian scholars developed systematic methods for evaluating the reliability of different texts and for producing authoritative versions based on careful comparison and analysis. These approaches remain fundamental to scholarly methodology and offer insights for developing better systems for evaluating information quality in digital environments. The gradual nature of the library's decline, rather than its destruction in any single catastrophic event, offers important lessons about the fragility of intellectual institutions. The popular narrative of dramatic destruction obscures the more mundane but equally important processes of institutional decay that result from inadequate maintenance, shifting priorities, and gradual resource erosion. This lesson is particularly relevant for contemporary institutions facing budget pressures and changing priorities. The Alexandrian experience suggests that intellectual institutions can be fatally weakened by seemingly minor reductions in support that accumulate over time. Preventing such decline requires active attention to institutional health and a commitment to maintaining the conditions that enable scholarly work to flourish. The library's international character and its role in facilitating cultural exchange provide insights for contemporary debates about globalization and cultural preservation. The Ptolemaic approach of actively collecting and preserving knowledge from multiple cultures, while fostering an environment where different traditions could interact and influence each other, offers a model for cultural engagement that respects diversity while enabling productive exchange. The educational innovations developed at Alexandria, combining advanced research with training for future scholars, established precedents that continue to influence contemporary higher education. The integration of research and teaching, the emphasis on original inquiry alongside the transmission of existing knowledge, and the creation of scholarly communities that crossed cultural boundaries remain fundamental principles of academic life. Finally, the library's ultimate fate reminds us that no intellectual achievement, however impressive, is permanent or secure. The preservation of human knowledge and culture requires constant effort and cannot be taken for granted. Each generation must make its own commitment to maintaining and extending the intellectual inheritance it has received. The story of the Library of Alexandria thus serves not as a simple cautionary tale about destruction and loss, but as a complex examination of what it takes to create, maintain, and transmit human knowledge across generations. Its lessons remain relevant because the fundamental challenges it faced, the conditions that enabled its success, and the factors that contributed to its decline continue to shape our contemporary efforts to preserve and advance human understanding. As we face our own challenges in organizing and preserving the vast amounts of information generated in the digital age, the experience of ancient Alexandria reminds us that technology alone is not sufficient. Success requires sustained institutional commitment, adequate resources, cultural openness, international cooperation, and a recognition that the work of knowledge preservation and transmission is never finished but must be renewed by each generation. The eternal quest for knowledge. Standing at the intersection of history and legend, the Library of Alexandria emerges not merely as an ancient institution, but as a powerful symbol of humanity's persistent drive to understand, preserve, and share knowledge across cultures and generations. The story we have traced through these pages reveals a complex institution that was simultaneously more and less than the myths surrounding it suggest, more sophisticated in its actual operations and achievements, yet less dramatically destroyed than popular narratives claim. The library's true significance lies not in any single moment of creation or destruction, but in what it represented as an ongoing human endeavor. For several centuries, Alexandria served as proof that different cultures could collaborate productively in the pursuit of knowledge, that generous institutional support could enable discoveries that advanced human understanding, and that systematic approaches to collecting and organizing information could amplify the impact of individual scholarly achievements. The scholars who worked within its walls, from Eratosthenes calculating the Earth's circumference to the anonymous scribes carefully copying deteriorating texts, were participating in something larger than their individual projects. They were contributing to a collective effort to preserve and extend the intellectual achievements of their predecessors while laying foundations for future discoveries. This collaborative, cumulative approach to knowledge creation remains one of the library's most important contributions to human civilization. Yet the library's gradual decline also teaches us that such achievements are never secure or permanent. The same conditions that enabled Alexandria's golden age, political stability, economic prosperity, generous patronage, and cultural openness, proved vulnerable to changing circumstances. As these supporting conditions eroded, even the most remarkable intellectual institution could not maintain its vitality indefinitely. This lesson resonates powerfully in our contemporary context, where digital technologies have created unprecedented opportunities for knowledge sharing while also generating new forms of fragility and vulnerability. Like the ancient scholars who watched papyrus scrolls deteriorate despite their best preservation efforts, we face the challenge of maintaining access to digital information across rapidly changing technological platforms and formats. The parallels between ancient Alexandria and modern efforts to create comprehensive, accessible repositories of human knowledge are neither coincidental nor superficial. They reflect enduring human aspirations and persistent practical challenges that transcend particular technologies or historical periods. Whether working with papyrus scrolls or digital files, scholars and librarians face similar fundamental questions about how to collect, organize, preserve, and provide access to the information that societies need to function and advance. The interdisciplinary character of Alexandrian scholarship, the international scope of its scholarly community, and its commitment to making knowledge accessible to qualified researchers, regardless of their cultural backgrounds, established precedents that continue to influence contemporary academic institutions. Modern universities, research libraries, and international scholarly collaborations all draw inspiration from the Alexandrian model, even as they adapt its principles to very different technological and social contexts. Perhaps most importantly, the Library of Alexandria demonstrated that knowledge is not a zero-sum resource that diminishes when shared, but rather something that grows stronger and more valuable through collaboration and exchange. The Ptolemaic vision of bringing together texts and scholars from throughout the known world created opportunities for synthesis and discovery that would have been impossible in more isolated settings. This insight remains crucial for contemporary debates about intellectual property, open access to research, and international cooperation in addressing global challenges. The Alexandrian experience suggests that attempts to hoard or restrict access to knowledge ultimately impoverish everyone, while policies that facilitate broad access and collaboration generate benefits that extend far beyond any single institution or nation. The myths that have grown up around the library's destruction, while historically inaccurate, reveal something important about how societies understand the relationship between knowledge and power, reason and superstition, progress and decline. These narratives persist because they address genuine anxieties about the fragility of civilization and the constant threat that ignorance, fanaticism, or simple neglect pose to human achievements. However, the real story of Alexandria's decline offers more nuanced and ultimately more useful lessons than the dramatic destruction myths. The gradual erosion of institutional support, the cumulative effects of political instability, and the challenges of maintaining complex preservation systems across changing circumstances provide insights that are directly relevant to contemporary institutional challenges. As we face our own uncertainties about the future of educational institutions, research funding, and cultural preservation, the Alexandrian experience reminds us that maintaining intellectual institutions requires active, ongoing commitment rather than benign neglect. The conditions that enable scholarship and learning to flourish must be consciously created and continuously renewed. The Library of Alexandria thus serves as both inspiration and warning for contemporary society. Its achievements demonstrate what becomes possible when societies commit significant resources to supporting learning and research, when they embrace cultural diversity and international collaboration, and when they take seriously the responsibility of preserving knowledge for future generations. At the same time, its decline illustrates how quickly even the most impressive intellectual achievements can be lost when the conditions supporting them erode. The library's fate reminds us that progress is neither automatic nor irreversible, and that each generation must make its own choices about what it values and how it will allocate its resources. In our current era of rapid technological change, increasing global connectivity and mounting challenges that require sophisticated understanding and international cooperation, the lessons of Alexandria remain remarkably relevant. The ancient library's vision of comprehensive knowledge collection, systematic organization, and broad accessibility continues to inspire modern efforts to democratize access to information and foster global scholarly collaboration. Yet Alexandria's experience also cautions us against assuming that technological capabilities alone are sufficient to achieve these goals. The human elements that made the ancient library successful, institutional commitment, scholarly dedication, cultural openness, and sustained resources remain as important today as they were 23 centuries ago. The story of the Library of Alexandria ultimately transcends its particular historical context to address fundamental questions about human nature and social priorities. It asks us to consider what we value most highly, how we choose to invest our collective resources, and what responsibilities we bear toward both our intellectual inheritance and future generations. These questions have no easy or permanent answers, but the Alexandrian experience suggests that societies flourish when they commit to supporting learning, embrace intellectual diversity, and recognize that knowledge grows stronger when it is shared rather than hoarded. As we write the next chapters in humanity's ongoing quest for understanding, the ancient scholars of Alexandria remain our companions in this eternal endeavor, reminding us both of what is possible when conditions are right and of our responsibility to create and maintain those conditions for ourselves and for those who will come after us. The Library of Alexandria may have vanished from the physical world, but its vision endures wherever people gather to learn, discover, and share knowledge across the boundaries that too often divide us. In every library, laboratory, and classroom where that vision is pursued, something of ancient Alexandria lives on, carrying forward humanity's most noble aspiration, the endless quest to understand our world and our place within it.